What's up everyone, Midnight Strike here, and you were watching the second and final part of the 2013 album review finale. So basically I'm just going to get on here and talk about all of the albums I've reviewed in sequential order that I reviewed them in or that they came out. And I'm going to try and keep it under a minute because the last ones actually ran a very long time, and like I said before, I'm going to keep it to a single year, so it is strictly the best albums of 2013, and as I'm going to talk about all of them, I suppose we're going to get into worst. So the main point of this video is to reflect on what I thought of the album at the time that I reviewed it, versus what I think about it now at the end of the year, now that we're nearing. So without further ado, here are all the albums that I reviewed and what I think of them. Since the disbanding of his former side project Echo Brain, ex-Metallica bassist Jason Newsted really hasn't had a lot going on in terms of activity. That is until just this year when he announced that he was going to be releasing an EP simply entitled Metal, a 4-song EP underneath the moniker of his last name, Newsted. Styled differently with a 3 instead of an E, this was supposed to be a return to form for this guy, and let me tell you, it was. It was very raw, it was metal. It's straight up metal. It's right in the namesake. My favorite songs off of that album was King of the Underdogs and Soldier Head. Ironically, those two were actually featured in an album I'm going to talk about, a few albums down the line from this one, Heavy Metal Music. But overall, this 4-set EP really didn't offer much in terms of variety and variation. So it was a little bit generic and bland, albeit the raw production value, but it was good for what it is. So admittedly, when I first heard Temper Temper, I didn't know what to think. I mean, it was completely different from anything Bullet had tried in the past, and I actually liked the title track. Hated Riot, but liked the title track. Now, the rest of the album was admittedly actually like Riot in terms of song structure, riffs, and, just the verses and everything, and it sounded very similar in terms of just blandness and generic crap. So I didn't know what to think of it before. It's not the worst album of 2013, but it's definitely far from being anything that I would recommend to anyone else. If you want to listen to some good Bullet, check out The Poison, check out Scream Aim Fire, hell, even check out Fever. Fever has some pretty damn good riffs on it. And even the new song that came out, Raising Hell, that's an amazing song, actually, and I really like it. But for this one, Temper Temper, it's a dud. Okay, I'll be the first to admit, I'm not the biggest Buckcherry fan in the world. I mean, I like 15, I like Lit Up, I like Time Bomb and a few songs off of Black Butterfly, but other than that, they really just don't have that much appeal to me. I mean, they just seem like one of those generic kind of Hollywood Sunset Strip bands that talk about nothing but getting drunk, fucking bitches, and just stuff like that. Basically, the cliche of all Hollywood rock bands. So there really hasn't really been that much appeal, but this album really didn't change anything. I thought it would be another 15, at least from the debut single, which was Gluttony, although it had a pop hook to it, and Wrath was probably the best song on that album. This is far from being the best album of the year. It's a decent album at best, but nothing that's going to change anyone's mind in terms of whether or not they want to become a fan. So I didn't even know this band existed until around like a month after they released their debut album, Filthy Empire, which is what I actually reviewed. I found out about Heaven's Basement through a fellow reviewer of mine, Daughter of Vampire, when I watched her review and was influenced to the point where I actually wanted to find this music and review it myself. Now, initially when I reviewed it, I thought that it was a very good return to form for hard rock, the genre in its entirety, and I thought that it was a good album as a whole, except for maybe they needed to work on their ballads a bit, because they were a bit just kind of disjointed and didn't really have that much flow and consistency when it came to just the power and the emotional grip that they had. But other than that, I mean, it's a fantastic, phenomenal album. The only problem is, nowadays, now that I listen to it, I just feel like I've heard it before. They have their own distinct sound, yes, but it just sounds a little bit generic when compared to bands such as AC/DC, Aerosmith, and Airborne. So, not necessarily the best album of 2013. It's up there. It's a very good album, but the only complaint that I would necessarily have is that it sounds a bit generic. Hardcore Superstar is actually one of the few bands that actually know what they're doing on the 80s metal revival scene. This album is no different. Come On, Take On Me, Hardcore Superstar. Now, my opinion really hasn't changed all that much since I reviewed it. Haven't really listened to it that often, save maybe a few songs, such as Above the Law and Dead Man's Shoes, but there are things on this album that are just a little bit too radio-friendly and bogged down by poor production, and it's just, I mean, it's not an average album. It is a good album, but it's not as good as, say, Split Your Lip or Dreamin' in a Casket, which are admittedly my favorite albums by the band. So, when it comes to this album, I gave it an 8 out of 10 before, and I stand by that rating. It's pretty much the same thing, and the song, I still stand by this. The song I Won't Take the Blame could have just been one song. So, that's basically it. Not necessarily the best album of 2013. It's a good album, though. You should check it out. So when I heard Anthrax was releasing new material in 2013, I was immediately excited, heavily anticipating whatever the heck they were going to release. When I found out it was going to be a covers album, some of that anticipation just washed away, but I was still very excited to see what Anthrax and Joey Belladonna, in particular, had to bring to the table. Admittedly, though, it's not that much. I mean, it's a good covers album, and it definitely showcases the power of Joey Belladonna's vocals, as well as the producers and the production value that Anthrax has on most of their records, but when it comes down to the nitty-gritty, when you really dissect the album as a whole, it just sounds, all the songs sound too much like their original counterparts. And that's kind of a shame, because Anthrax were well known for their really original covers, such as Come On Bring the Noise, their Public Enemy #1 cover, and their Sabbath Bloody Sabbath cover, among other things. So it's a bit of a disappointment, but it is what it is. It's still got great songs on it, such as TNT and Anthems, of course, but I wouldn't necessarily be voting this as the best album of 2013 anytime soon, or ever. Killswitch Engage's 6th studio album can still be summed up by just 2 words. Holy shit. I gave this a 10 out of 10 in my initial review, and I still stand by that sentiment. I still love this album to death. I think it's another master of puppets. It is a masterpiece among masterpieces. I would probably rate this in the top records of 2013, if not the best. I'm not exactly sure right now, but I will get to it in the verdict and actually give you a fair comparison between all of the top albums that I actually give you. But Jesse Leach returns, and Killswitch engages back with a screaming vengeance after the disastrous KSE-09 and the tragedy with Howard Jones and his diabetes. He's okay, though, so that's good. He's okay. So, basically, it is an awesome album from start to finish, and every time I listen to a single song, I just can't stop listening to the album as a whole. It's just that amazing. If any of you are offended that I call Skid Row Mark II now without Sebastian Bach, get out now. Because you're not going to be happy with my opinion on this EP. I think it is an absolute pile of garbage. Skid Row Mark II, or Skid Row, or whatever the fuck you want to call them, should just stop. They should just lay down and just stop. They should call it something else, maybe make a punk rock band if that's what they want to do, or a country/bluegrass band if that's what they want to do, since Revolutions Per Minute was such a great hit, guys, you know, with Johnny Solinger's amazing punk smooth, twangy country-style vocals in such classics as You Lie, now we bring you this piece of shit. It was very generic, it was overblown, and it sounded like a Sebastian Bach ripoff. That's what he was trying to do in songs like Kings of Demolition. The only good song on that entire album was Stitches. And I'm even surprised I'm giving it that much credit. So in their newest release entitled Onyx, Pop Evil have decided to take a bunch of influences from bands such as Papa Roach and Linkin Park and combine them, meshing them into one album. Unfortunately, this works against the album's cohesion because sometimes they just don't sound right. I mean, there are songs such as Trenches and Fly Away that are actually very catchy, but there's other songs that just don't exactly fit right with the album. I mean, it's got good production, and where they decide to do a little bit of screaming and a little bit of rapping, like rap rock, like Papa Roach does in Linkin Park with Chester Bennington screams and everything, it sounds good, but it just doesn't really mesh well with the material that they're trying to use. It doesn't really mesh well with the style, I guess. I mean, one time they're rapping, the other time, the next minute they're doing something completely different. It doesn't really sound right. I mean, it's a good album, great effort, and it's definitely better than their debut, but it's nowhere near being the best album of 2013. As a man in his early teens who was very into hard rock, very into bands such as AC/DC, and as a man who was blown away by Airborne's debut with songs like Stand Up for Rock and Roll, Girls in Black, and Diamond in the Rough, and of course, Too Much, Too Young, Too Fast, and as a man who was disappointed by No Guts, No Glory with its bland, sound-alike things, Black Dog Barking, the new album by Airborne in 2013, has managed to yet again blow me away with how amazing it is. I honestly think that it's one of the best albums of 2013. It's hard rock at its finest. The production is very crisp. There's that audible crunch in the guitar melodies. The solos are just everywhere, off the walls, and they even remake one of their songs from their first EP called Ready to Rock, and I absolutely love everything that they did with it. One of the best albums of 2013. AC/DC would be proud, and I hope they are, because Airborne, you have definitely outdone yourselves on this one. Ungrateful by Escape the Fate is definitely an interesting album to look at. I mean, on one hand, you got the fact that it's their lightest album and has the most popish elements in it, and on the other, you have the fact that all of the band members' chemistry seems to be at an all-time high, and the musicianship on this album is pretty much bar none to anything they've ever done in the past. So I really like the musicianship, but it just feels like it's not heavy enough to sustain my interest. I mean, of course, all the other stuff was light as well, as it is post-hardcore as opposed to traditional heavy modern metalcore, but that's what I liked about it, was the traditional light alternative to heavy. So going even lighter, I don't really know how I feel about that. So this is just kind of, it's a good album, but just that. It's not great, it's not amazing, it's just good. So I think that's about all I have to say on that. So, Alice in Chains also put another album out this year. It's pretty good. First album since 2009's Black Gives Way to Blue, and second album featuring William Duvall, technically on vocals, with Jerry Cantrell mainly doing complete lead vocals. So there's less William Duvall in this album. That's my main gripe, is there's almost little to no William on this album, bar some of the backing vocals, whilst on Black Gives Way to Blue, he actually had a song, Last of My Kind, that he sang completely on. So, other than that, I have grown, the song Lab Monkey has grown on me, and that was one of my main points of criticism, is I didn't like the song Lab Monkey, and now it's actually grown on me. I think it's kind of a catchy tune. So, other than that, I mean, put more William Duvall in. He's listed as the main lead vocalist, so you should treat him as such. That's pretty much it. So, I like this album. Really good album. Not really the best album of 2013, but it's up there in my tops probably. If I would ever do a list, this would definitely be in the top 10. I bet you skipped to this part, didn't you? Don't lie, it's okay. I would be concerned about what I would think about this album too, because it caused a great, and I mean a great, deal of controversy between a bunch of other fellow reviewers and myself. So, not to mention all of these Megadeth fans defending this album to the death, or basically burning it at the stake. So, what do I think about it? The melodies don't necessarily go well together, and it's subpar, it's mediocre, and it's not as bad as Temper Temper by Bullet for My Valentine or F.U. Frequency Unknown by Queensryche, or the fake Queensryche. But it does sound good when you're drunk. I actually gotta say, it does sound halfway decent. The only songs that I don't like are Don't Turn Your Back, and I think there was another one. I can't even fucking remember it, but it sounds good when you're drunk. That's like the main thing I can say about it. That's like the main positive, is it sounds good when you're fucking intoxicated. So, drink up and listen to some Super Collider. That's really all I have to say. So 13, right from the get-go, was a huge deal for Black Sabbath. It was their first studio album since '95, as well as their first studio album with returning vocalist Ozzy Osbourne on vocals since 1978's Never Say Die. So that's 35 years in the making, practically. And what do they give us? They give us an amazing quality album, definitely one of the best of 2013, but the only thing that I can really say against it is the fact that all of these songs sound like they could have been on, say, some of the 70s albums. They don't necessarily add anything new to the table, unlike Van Halen did in A Different Kind of Truth. They put a fresh spin on what was already established. These guys, however, it sounds exactly the same. So all of these songs could have been on, say, Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath, or Paranoid, or any of those ones. I do like the innovations in the ending, though, where they put the church bells from Black Sabbath in the ending of the last song on the album. I do like the album, definitely one of my favorites, but some of the songs definitely sound like they don't have that much inspiration, I suppose, but that's the only minor complaint that I have about this album. It's amazing, it's a masterpiece from start to finish, and it's a true classic. I mean, can you really deny Black Sabbath? It's an awesome album, guys, and definitely better than anything they've done in the 90s or 80s. So, when I first heard about Skillet's new album, Rise, I was thinking to myself, please don't make an Awake Part 2. Please just harken back to the days of Comatose and Collide, where everything was very heavy, very inspired, very amazingly produced, and there was that perfect balance between hard and soft, light and heavy, like really, really fast, and just really taking your time to let it all sink in. Unfortunately, though, that's exactly what this is. Awake had way too many ballads on it, and this is basically Awake Part 2 with a thin production. So this isn't one of the worst albums, but definitely not one of the best. It's just average. It's not really even that good. I mean, I did like a few songs off of the album Rise. I like the title track, Sick of It, Circus for a Psycho, but other than that, I mean, this album really doesn't have that much replayability at all, so I can understand why people might like it, but for me, it was just another Awake. So with heavy metal music, Jason Newsted has undergone the Trivium route by releasing an EP in the same year that the original debut album is scheduled to be released. And the EP contains a lot of songs, 2 songs to be exact, 2 of my favorite songs that are supposed to be on the debut album, Soldier Head and King of the Underdogs. I am very glad that he chose these songs to be on heavy metal music because they were my favorite songs on the EP and they definitely shine on this album. So there are a lot of different songs on this album, and they all use the exact same production. It's very raw, it's very intense, and it's just straight up, what is the name of the album? Straight up heavy metal music. That's exactly what this is. I really like it, and my favorite song on the album is probably Nocturnus, because it just gives off this huge Black Sabbath vibe. Definitely one of the most underrated albums of the year, probably, because most people are going to be looking at like Dream Theater and Trivium and all that other stuff, and myself, Kill Switch Engage, but this is definitely up there. This is definitely one of the better albums of 2013. So now we're going to talk about Hail to the King, an Avenged Sevenfold album that severely disappointed me. It was supposed to be a culmination of a bunch of my famous rock inspirations, however, it just fell flat on its face, because instead of innovating, they just took the influences and ran with it and formed songs around it that sounded like other iterations of other songs. Coming Home sounded like Iron Maiden, Hail to the King sounded just kind of bland and generic and boring to listen to. Um, this Means War, a lot of people said it sounded like Sad But True. Of course, I didn't notice it until the end, but now I can't get it out of my head. And there's just a bunch of other songs on this album that just end up sounding like rehashed versions of other songs. And to be honest, I never really listened to it. Hail to the King. I haven't listened to it since I reviewed it, and I probably won't be giving this a replay anytime soon, because it's honestly just not that good of an album. So we have waited 2 full years since Dream Theater's last effort. It's one of the few bands from the 1980s who are significantly and continuously putting out solid grade A material. Now, this is the first album since a dramatic turn of events, which actually hit the shelves in 2011, and was the first to feature Mike Mangini. And now this is the first release to actually feature Mangini's writing credits on the drums, as the other ones were previously written and, in some cases, recorded prior to Mangini joining the band. So this is basically where the drum work definitely shines, and Mike Portnoy, while he was an amazing drummer, probably my favorite drummer of all time, Mike Mangini is just as good, which is saying a lot. So definite positive, but other than that, there's a real radio-friendly polish on some of the songs, just some of the songs, that don't have that much edge to them. And that's the really big thing that's dragging this album down. I feel like the album is kind of lifted up and hoisted up by the songs False Awakening, Sweet the Enemy Inside, and Illumination Theory, and the rest of the album just kind of falls flat. I mean, those two songs are very good in their own right, but they can't hold up an entire album. I mean, it's still a good album in itself, it's just those two songs, or those three songs, moreover, just kind of pull the album out of being just another Dream Theater release. Okay, so I admit, I got really hyped up in my initial review of this album. I honestly really do like this, but some of the disturbed elements definitely have rubbed off on me since the time I actually reviewed it. So, in the beginning, I initially only thought Brave This Storm and To Believe sounded like Disturbed, but after reviewing this and actually listening to it more in depth, I can definitely hear the Disturbed-esque influence on the rest of the material. So that's not necessarily to say it's a bad thing, but it's definitely prevalent on the final product. And, I do like this album, but I have come to the conclusion that I like In Waves better, and it's still my favorite album, In Waves, of course, and Ascendancy. So I'm probably going to bump this down to like a 9.5. That's probably what I would have rated it now if I were to review it, because I was really hyped up for it. I was really excited, and when I finally listened to it, it actually did blow me away. But now, when I'm looking back on it in hindsight, it was a great album. It still is a great album, of course, but it's just releases such as Ascendancy and In Waves are definitely surpassing it. And this is probably going to be like one of my best albums of 2013, one of the best albums, excuse me, and definitely one of my favorites. So when it comes to my favorite album of 2013, obviously it's going to be Disarm the Descent by Killswitch Engage. So I'm going to rate that one as the best, and of course I'm going to have a bunch of honorable mentions that didn't make the cut because either I didn't review them, didn't listen to them in time, or maybe I'll do a review on them next year. Depends on what I feel like doing. So basically, the best album of 2013, for me at least, is going to be Disarm the Descent, with a close runner-up of Vengeance Falls. So my third, I'm actually not sure, but, Vengeance Falls and Disarm the Descent for me are probably my favorite albums of this year. So with that, thank you very much for watching. This is Midnight Strike 3625. Prepare for some honorable mentions, keep calm, and rock on.